Good evening. Welcome to the first session in the undergraduate webinar series, an interactive online platform connecting high school students to the Ashoka community. In this series, we will cover all topics related to Ashoka's undergraduate program. Our esteemed faculty and academic counselors will guide students in understanding various aspects of the university, including the academics, student life, admissions, careers, and other topics. I am Sahajpreet Kaur, an undergraduate student at Ashoka, pursuing a major in computer science and entrepreneurship. Thank you for joining us for today's session, CS plus X, Unlocking the New Computer Science. There is hardly a field of study or profession without CS embedded in it. As a pilot, you would be controlling flight computers, or in the military, computers would be battlefield accessories. Over the next hour, we take you on a whirlwind tour of the new evolutions in CS, how it enables spectacular inventions, its impact in driving innovation across fields, and more importantly, how you can be a part of it. Feel free to post any questions that you may have in the Q&A box. We will be taking them up at the end of the session. We have with us today Professor Debayan Gupta, who is an assistant professor of computer science at Ashoka. He is also a visiting professor and research affiliate at MIT and MIT Sloan. Before coming to Ashoka, Professor Gupta held an extraordinary faculty position in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at MIT. He has a PhD from Yale and a bachelor's degree from St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. Thank you, Professor, for joining us. Over to you.
Hi, Sahajpreet. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Without any further delay, let's get started. So let me first share my screen, and then I'll give you the aforementioned promised tour of CS plus X. All right. Sahajpreet, could you just confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, Professor, it's visible.
All right, excellent. Now, computer science is a weird subject, right? Like, for a very long time, I, along with many other people, had a lot of trouble understanding what it was really about. And this is true for other subjects as well, but at different points in time. So I want to start talking about what computer science is in the first place. So here's what we know for certain. It has nothing to do with computers, and it's not a science, right? Most of the stuff we'll study you will end up studying in computer science. Those are not things that technically require computers to think about, right? Computers just make that monetizable and easy. And much of computer science isn't scientific in the usual sense of the term. They are not things where you're performing experiments to find out new insights about the natural world. A lot of it is actually synthesis. You're creating programs, you're building new things. So what is this subject? What is it actually? And I remember there's this old talk given by Hal Abelson where he goes into how it's really similar to geometry, in the sense that geometry started out as sort of people were measuring land. It's geometry, measuring of land, geo. And it was done because people wanted to figure out how much they should tax their land for, how much they should sell it for, and things like that. But over time, we've learned that it's so much more. It's its own subject. It is beyond the measurement of geography. And it has turned into its own idea, and it has its own problems and so many other things. And I believe, as do many others, that we're still at the geometry phase of computer science. We're still dealing with computers because we haven't really understood the subject. We're just scratching at the edges. And even then, it's giving us so much. So I want to get into a little bit of what are the things computer science can do, and why I got into it, and why I think you should also. All right? Now, all of you have heard this usual spiel, right? computer science is used absolutely everywhere. It's a massive force multiplier. You take any subject, you add computer science to it, and boom, you can now do things you could never do before. And I'm going to try and take you through some examples of these kinds of ideas. These 4 tasks that we have in front of you, these are things that we're doing research on right now at Ashoka. And we chose these 4 for a very particular reason, because even though the COVID one and the drug-resistant bacteria one seem sort of both semi-biological, it's because we're using completely different techniques for them. And that, to me, is one of the most important factors about computer science. It's very philosophical in a sense to say that why is one problem, let's say finding drug-resistant bacteria, different or easier or harder than a different problem? Let's say figuring out admissions trends in higher education in India. It turns out one of the main insights of computer science is that problems that may sound very different and that may appear to have very different solutions can actually be attacked with equivalent systems in computer science. And this, of course, is being done as we speak. I put Google up for now, but I could have chosen any company, Facebook, Microsoft, Dropbox. Everyone's doing this, right? The second one in here is actually one of my absolute favorite things that's going on, the predicting risk of, in this case, it's cardiac events for Google. But many other companies are doing this. Now, this is an ability that humans do not have. Humans do not have the ability to look into someone's eyes and tell them, you're suffering from hypertension. We just do not have that ability. We don't have that precision. Now, it turns out that for diabetes, for hypertension, and for heart attacks, well, certain kinds of heart attacks anyway, it turns out that just looking at your retina and looking at the veins in the retina can, with the help of some nifty little artificial intelligence work, lead you to very high quality medical diagnostics. And we are starting a project, and you'll see a slide on that later, at Ashoka as well, looking into applying artificial intelligence to the area of medical diagnostics. Similarly, there are many, many other problems that the world faces right now, from climate change to delivering water to neighborhoods that don't have water. That's something I worked on for a while, so just think about it this way. Imagine you have money to do a certain amount of stuff. You have enough money to set up 50,000 water filtration plants across India. Where exactly would you locate them to cause the maximum amount of impact? We're looking at COVID vaccinations right now. Many people don't want to get vaccinated because there's all sorts of superstitions about them all over the world. When you're looking at influence networks or family connections in remote villages, who do you choose to convince first so that other people will get convinced? Who are the influencers in these social networks? And we're going to be using exactly the same techniques that people would use, let's say in Facebook, to figure out whom to advertise through. And it turns out there are many, many interesting ways to do all of this stuff. Now, one of the standard problems that is prevalent, at least in Indian education, broadly speaking, is that it's extremely siloed. And this is something which I think is a very major part of why Indian education, despite having excellent professors and wonderful students, has really lagged behind. There's a reason that no matter what world top 100 you look at, there's no Indian universities in there. And I think that has to do with 2 issues. First is siloing, and the second is the liberal arts. Now, I'll address the second one first. What are the liberal arts? Well, there's a historical perspective to that. It started out back in ancient Greece, and they were meant to be the arts that were required, the things you needed to know to exist properly as a liberated person, as a free citizen of Greece. And there were 7 such arts. It was astronomy, mathematics, geometry, music, rhetoric, grammar, and logic. That was the set of arts. And you needed to know those things to sort of be able to perform reasonably in everyday society in ancient Greece. Now, it also happens to be the standard mechanism of Western education. Now, you can have a liberal arts degree in a college, that's different, but the vast majority of Western universities are liberal arts in that sense. They refuse to silo technical items away from what people consider to be non-technical items. And that has led them to becoming extremely successful. I've been to quite a few of those. As Edpreet mentioned, I taught at MIT for a while, and I did my PhD from another place nearby called Yale. And both of those places put a lot of importance on this non-siloing. In fact, no matter what kind of degree you're pursuing, you're required to take courses from all of these other areas. If you're looking at, let's say, Columbia, Columbia does a lot of work in AI and ethics. And that turns out to be something for which you actually need massive interdisciplinary expertise. You need people in philosophy, you need people in law, you need people in computer science, you need people in logic, and all of these people need to work together to solve these problems. And this applies to just so many of our problems that exist today, whether we're talking about sort of removing fake news, in which case it's actually a project I'm working on with some media studies people right now at Ashoka, or whether you're talking about trying to understand how to come up with a drug that can possibly combat the spike protein in COVID. Not combat, that's not the right word to use, but how to deal with, how to try and attack it. These are all things that require massive interdisciplinary expertise. And if you grow up, and by growing up, I mean academically growing up, if you're always just interacting with your own people, every time we make some kind of breakthrough, we're basically sort of hoping that students will somehow talk outside of class across disciplines and create their own startups. That's a very stupid way to go about things. And Ashoka is really, it's one of the reasons I joined Ashoka in the first place, is really one of the premier universities in India which is doing this properly, in my opinion. So let me go through what I mean by CS plus X at Ashoka. First of all, the courses are fun, okay? I've been to colleges with non-fun courses, and that's just sad. Growing up, confession, I hated school. I just absolutely despised everything to do with studying. It's a running joke in my family that I ended up in academia. But I think it had a lot to do with the way stuff is taught in India. And it's something that I hope will change very soon. I quite like some of the changes that have been taking place over the last few years. But far too much of learning in India is rote learning. It frankly encourages cheating because you're so bored. And all of the syllabi are super duper old. Those are problems that we just do not have at Ashoka. I mean, if my class is boring or sad or my syllabus is junk, it's my fault. It's nothing structural. Structurally, what we have at Ashoka are extremely high quality cutting edge courses that are at the level that you would find at any top university in the world. And these all have syllabi that are at I used cutting edge already, didn't I? Bleeding edge, there we go. The second part is, not only are the courses really interesting, they're also interdisciplinary. And what that means is, I'll give you an example of a course I was teaching just this summer. I call it the New Geography. We're looking at various problems in the world from the point of view not just of computer science, but computer science, economics, and political science, and whatever else we can get our hands on, frankly. Because it's sort of like that story of the 7 blind men and the elephant, you know? Otherwise, just looking at a problem from one perspective, you really don't have an idea of anything that's going on, right? So just think of it this way. Think of the gig economy right now, right? How do you analyze what's going to happen to the future of work? What's going to happen to jobs in the future, right? To gather information properly about it and to reason effectively, you need to understand the computational systems that are driving this, the economic pressures, along with a host of other current circumstances. You just can't do it using just one thing. It's stupid. I'll skip the world-class faculty one, but I will mention I'm very much the least impressive of my colleagues. I can just sort of talk really quickly. That's why I'm here, because we need to finish this in 30 minutes. And I'll talk about the revolutionary research opportunities in a couple more slides. I just want to quickly mention some administrative trivia of sorts. We have a bunch of majors. Many students end up doing interdisciplinary majors, CS plus math, that sort of thing. Many people end up minoring in computer science as well. There's also something called doing a concentration. And we see this a lot. We see a lot of people working, say, on economics who've decided, hold on, I'm really interested in solving this sort of two-market problem in economics, or I'm working on game theory. And it turns out that computer science can give me some really powerful tools to do things from running simulations to actually solving various kinds of problems. One of my favorite sort of economics problems is the repeated prisoner's dilemma problem. You've probably heard of the prisoner's dilemma problem. If not, look it up. But there's something called the repeated prisoner's dilemma problem, where the same group of people undergo the prisoner's dilemma multiple times. And it turns out that this was actually solved by computer scientists using something called finite state automata. So it's actually really interesting to see how insights from one area can carry over into others and give you new abilities that you didn't think you had before. This is the current set of faculty. We have a bunch of other faculty who are not permanent, but this is the current set of core faculty that we have. All really cool people. I think I have the prettiest smile though, so that's sort of my specialty. Let me quickly get into the big question that almost everyone asks, at least in India, right? They say, okay, Ashoka University, cool, very nice, you've given me all this talk, but you're giving me a bachelor's degree, which is a B.Sc, and then there's this fourth-year advanced studies thing in computer science. So I can do a 3-year or 4-year degree, effectively. How is that different from a B.Tech? How is that different from your run-of-the-mill engineering degree? And I want to talk about it in two ways. One is, frankly, the quality of it. I think the kind of broad exploration along with the quality of the Ashoka classes is just frankly significantly higher than most of the bachelor's degrees in engineering that you would get anywhere in India, first of all. And second, I think there's something intrinsically different from deciding to do an engineering degree in computer science versus doing a science degree in computer science. And that's what we offer at Ashoka. We do a lot of engineering stuff, right? We do a lot of stuff that most people would classify as engineering. I have a bunch of students right now working on doing some processing and actually physically building, at least we were before COVID hit us, something called a covalent magnetic tweezer. And that's a collaboration with the biology department, where we're basically building something like a tractor beam to sort of stretch and squeeze proteins in different ways. So we can see that when proteins are undergoing different amounts of stress, they get into different conformations and how other proteins interact with them. And it's, I believe, the only single molecule lab in India. Actually, there's like 2 others, one at Columbia University and one at Max Planck somewhere. But it's one of a handful in the world. And we're actually building this up, and these are all undergrads who are doing this research. That's not really something you get to do at most engineering colleges. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that many of the low-hanging fruit, many of the cool opportunities are exactly in these interdisciplinary areas, are at the edges of knowledge. And you'll never reach the edges of knowledge if you're stuck doing a standard engineering curriculum, probably devised in 1995 or something. All right, if you have more questions, specific questions about this, I'm happy to answer it. I will confess that questions to do with the new sort of national education policy, it remains to be seen exactly what's going to be implemented. But we're actually quite happy that they're giving us the 4-year degree. It's something we've been after for a long time. So if that gets implemented properly, that'll be something that we are very excited about. But right now, we just don't know the details of the implementation. We'll know more once the government tells us. Let me get into some of these research topics that I promised. I'll just randomly pick a few. I already talked about the covalent magnetic tweezers thing. Fascinating stuff. Basically, we take a single protein, attach a tiny amount of iron to the end of it, then we wiggle some magnets around to stretch and squeeze the protein. And the idea of this is really Let me just take a minute and talk about this. I'm sorry, I'll just take another minute. You know the picture of the cell you were probably taught about in high school? You know, you have the cell and there's a sort of cell wall and the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Of course it is. And then you have all of these things. That's completely not real. That's not what a cell really looks like. A real cell actually has these like weird tentacles that sort of come out of the cell wall, and it sort of feels its way around your body. And it's really fascinating. And these tentacles are made up of various kinds of proteins, right? In this case, we're focusing on something called talin and integrin proteins, but anyway, they act more mechanically almost than chemically. So if you've seen any of those old Tom and Jerry cartoons with, you know, the collapsible gate style things with punching gloves at the end, so you just squeeze one end and it goes like wing and goes and punches someone, it looks like a collapsible gate. Yeah, that's what these proteins look like, right? And when they attach to something at the end, they collapse to different amounts. So the collapsible gate sort of to different amounts, they take different conformations. And according to those conformations, other proteins come and attach to those, and they undergo conformational changes, and they go through changes which cause other proteins to attach to them, and so on. And the result of this mechanotransduced is the proper word for it. I prefer to use the word mechanical. I think biologists just like complex language. But the result of this chemical and mechanical behavior is what we call biology, which is completely fascinating. And I'm really interested in the longer term of reverse engineering this behavior to figure out essentially the if then else, the sort of branching decision-making logic of the human biological cell. I'm also, my main area of research is actually cryptography and computer security, and I'm super interested in deployable secure computation. And that has to do with the fact that, you know, we have all of this, you know, cryptography all done, right? Since the 1990s, at least, we've been really good at sort of locking things up with passwords, but nothing's really helped. People are still getting hacked left and right. So what can we do to actually help real world individuals defend their data better? And that's something I'm really interested in. And I focus on a wide range of areas in that general field. If you have specific questions about that, I've got other talks online where I talk about it. I can answer some questions, but if I get started on this thing, we won't stop until 5 o'clock. So I'm just going to skip ahead to the next slide. Here as well, I want to mention just 2 others. We've already talked about quite a bit of stuff, so I'll just mention the human computable hashing algorithms and fairness in AI. How about that? So human computable hashing is really simple. Let's go back World War I. Soldiers fighting in trenches. Now, these guys needed to converse over these trenches, right? They needed to tell, hey, we're going to attack at the same time and stuff like that. And so they needed encryption protocols. They needed code protocols that were good enough so that soldiers, relatively uneducated ones, could compute them mentally while under a lot of pressure. You know, you're not going to do, what is 6,182 mod 287 plus 16 while, you know, 109 grams of lead is flying at your face. You're not going to be able to do that. So they actually made algorithms or techniques that were optimized for human computation, right? That humans could think about. Ever since then, we really moved towards computer optimized techniques. We've been thinking about, okay, what can computers do better? And so I'm also really interested, especially in the case of generating passwords and things like that, can we come up with algorithmic techniques that use human visualization more clearly and that are actually really hard to represent on a computer? What are the things, what are the mathematical outcomes that human minds can compute? Fairness in AI, another very fascinating field. Basically, companies are just using AI left and right, just all over the place. Unfortunately, there's no real insight into when AI is being bad. And multiple people are doing this. You know, if an individual is racist, it's pretty easy to say, hey, you're a really evil person. You just never give jobs to Buddhists or something. But what if it's a box? What if it's a machine that says, you know, give a job to this person, not to that person. Give insurance to this person, but not to that person. And it so happens that this thing is super biased. How do you actually figure out what's causing that bias and how do you fix it? Understanding fairness, accountability, and transparency in AI is going to become more and more important as we go on. And it's a huge area of research here at Ashoka. And when we say research, this is actually stuff that we enable and facilitate through various centers. For political data analysis, we have the Trivedi Center. They're doing phenomenal work, look it up. Econ, we have a huge econ department, apparently just filled with geniuses. I don't know how they got so many of them in one place, working at Ashoka. I'm actually working on this Bharat Sim thing, along with Gautam Menon, who's one of India's foremost epidemiologists and modelers, trying to understand how best to model the spread of COVID, especially into rural areas in India, which we're quite worried about right now. And the Ramses thing is actually something we just got published recently, and it's set to, we're trying to understand that sort of right now reservation policies in India and frankly abroad are basically politically governed. You know, we say group X should get 5% reservation, group Y should get 7%. Well, why? You know, why shouldn't group X get 3.38 or 5.81? Where should this percentage come from? And we really don't want to depend on sort of prevalent political winds for this sort of thing, right? We want to do it in some sort of data-driven fashion. So we're trying to understand how to do that properly, along with trying to understand the intersectionality of disadvantage. How do you aid someone who's suffering from multiple disadvantages? Maybe they are physically disabled, maybe they're from a minority group, maybe they're from an economically backward area. How do you actually stack these things into an index that is reasonable? And all of these things are enabled by a lot of cross-departmental partnerships. And also, okay, that's a really unfortunate acronym, PPAP, but we have some really good public-private academic partnerships that we're engaging right now. Along with these partnerships, we regularly hold really cool workshops. We just put this one up because I thought it was cool and I like to name drop. I'm not going to read out the names. Basically, we have a lot of really cool and famous people come over all the time and talk about what they're doing. And I think this is something that's really important for undergrads because I don't think we really need to teach undergrads. Okay, please don't cut my salary for saying that. But I really don't. I think the main thing to do with undergrads is sort of onboard them. Right? Most undergrads are just sick of education and they just want to be inspired. And really my job is to light fires and run away. I give undergrads sort of inspiring ideas. I give them stuff so that they can build on those ideas by themselves. And then I just stand aside and watch. And usually it's just magic. And having these kinds of really successful people who have been there and done things to come to you and actually give you firsthand backgrounds on what they're up to can be extremely inspiring. And when sort of linked in with our centers and with the interdisciplinary courses, they can be really good sort of jumping boards for your future research. This is a really new computing lab that we've just started with emphasis, and we're doing some amazingly cool stuff. I'm actually really interested in the oral aid for visually disabled individuals. So, you know, if you've ever seen like Daredevil, or, you know, you remember that Nokia phone in the first Batman movie, Batman Begins, where if you can't see anything, but the sound actually tells you where stuff is. So we're trying to figure out whether we can use directional audio to help visually impaired people to not really see, but at least know where things are in their visual field. Bunch of other things, designing new kinds of drugs for diseases, using artificial intelligence, really cool stuff going on. And this is a huge lab we're setting up. And I'm pretty sure in a few years, you'll see some fascinating cutting edge research coming out of this place. I just want to highlight that this isn't just professors doing this, right? Students are doing this all the time. And I mean, we've just picked 3 students, but you know, we have students actually publishing high quality papers in real conferences and journals. These are all from like the last academic year. If you go back in different years, you'll find more people, but these are people who are doing really, really cool things, undergrads doing high quality research. And the usual question that people ask, okay, you've given me all this spiel, where do people end up? Cool places. Ashoka's a new university, but regardless, we've I think, garnered a fairly good reputation. Many of our students end up at very high quality companies. I've actually taught all of these people. Sanchit, yeah, he's at Google. Nishka is doing Microsoft research, so, but I know she's interested in doing more cool stuff, some higher studies stuff as well. And Barun is actually not at Microsoft. He's just recently moved to Google as well. But basically, all of these students end up going into really cool companies. Many of them end up doing further studies in various places. If you have more questions about that, reach out to our students. But that's it from me for today. Sahajpreet, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And we can move on to some questions from the audience. So the first thing, I guess, a lot of questions have brought this up, that there's this preconceived notion of computer science being all about coding. And a lot of high schoolers are scared that, they don't have a flair for coding. Will they be able to do well in computer science? So what would you say to them? Is coding a skill that can be learned, or is it something that is inherent?
So usually I end up sort of unteaching people whatever they think they know about coding. So for example, in the starting semester, I'm going to teach a class called Foundations of Computer Programming. And there usually in the first 1/3 of the class, there is no programming because I need to unteach the people who've done some coding, whatever they've learned in school. Coding is something like speaking a language. It takes time. And I've seen a lot of people who say that, oh, those are the people who can code and I can't. Well, there's a bunch of people who speak German and I can't. That doesn't mean they're any cleverer than me, right? So it takes a little bit of time. It'll take you a semester or two. You will learn how to code and you will learn how to code very well indeed. Don't worry about that. And computer science and coding, it's the difference between sort of automotive engineering and being a mechanic. Both are important, right? All the automotive engineers in the world would be completely useless without the average mechanic. And you do need to learn a lot about how to fix a car to be a good engineer, but they're not necessarily the same activity.
So if I can just expand this, would you say that there are some skills that are inherent or kind of like a prerequisite for you to become a computer scientist? Do you have to necessarily be good at logic, be analytical, or is it everybody's cup of tea? Can anybody venture into computer science?
I mean, if I have a way to communicate with you, I can probably teach you computer science. At least the areas that I know. I mean, if we speak different languages and I have to like gesture at you or something, it'll be hard, but that's about the only requirement I can think of.
So you also talked about the difference between a traditional degree, an engineering degree, as well as what Ashoka has to offer. So how does Ashoka alter its curriculum to give you that kind of interdisciplinary experience?
So actually, I think it was remarkably easy for them. They just put a good group of professors together and gave them a lot of freedom. I think one of the biggest problems that we have in India is that I'm not going to name universities, but before I chose Ashoka, I was looking around at other places. And one of the most irritating things I found is that there were committees and syllabi and other people telling me what to teach. And I'm like, really? Really, really? There's like people who are not in touch with my field, who don't know what's going on, who are creating syllabi that have to be signed off by 14 other people. Most of my students who've taken classes with me at Ashoka know that I actually like to change the syllabus sort of on the fly, right? When I was teaching an introductory programming class last semester when COVID hit, and halfway through the semester, I was like, you know what? Most of you are sick and tired of learning about, Hanoi or whatever I'm teaching right now, because there's this huge event going on. All right, rest of the semester, we're going to simulate an epidemic spreading. And we ended up writing some pretty high quality simulators, right? And of course, when you're doing that, I have to be clever about it and work in all of the different concepts. So, they'll learn about encapsulation in this way, and they'll learn about this other thing in that way. And sort of, I have to work that in, but the actual use cases, the actual things that I'm teaching are just completely different from semester to semester. And that is not something that's possible unless the professors are allowed to be organic. And that's both very easy and very hard. It's very easy in the sense that it's not something that you have to, the administration has to hammer away at, but it's very hard because letting go of that control takes a leap of faith. And that's sometimes very hard to do.
Right. And so if there is somebody who would like to pursue, say, an economics or a biology, how could computer science help them, even if it's not their main field? Should they still opt for a computer science, probably as a minor or a concentration?
Yes. Like that's it. That's my absolute answer. Yes. There's just, like I said, computer science is a force multiplier right now. Whatever you're doing, it'll help you scale it and make you let you do it better, right? If you're doing econ, there's a huge number of econ students who work with me on all sorts of really cool problems, right? Because if you talk to an economist right now, chances are statistically, if you ask them, what do you do on a daily basis as part of your work, there are two things that they'll be doing. If they're a dev econ person, they'll be doing field studies, which they can't right now because of COVID, or they'll be coding. Because a lot of the stuff that economists do now is take large scale data and try to gain insights into that data. Why are these things happening? What are the patterns I'm seeing? Guess what's really good at manipulating large amounts of data and gaining insight? Computer science. So much so that the field of data science has come forth from that intersection. So, you know, statistics and CS together, so to speak. That's my plain answer. Yes, you should.
Right. And another question came up about shorter courses in CS at Ashoka. So like I mentioned, we do have a concentration as well as a minor. So Professor, would you like to add something on that? On if somebody is pursuing something else, why should they still opt for this and the options they have?
It depends on what they want to do, right? So if someone's really certain that they want to do archaeology, later on they're going to study archaeology. So they're doing some historical studies here at Ashoka. They're taking some other courses just because they want to explore. Well, guess what? If tomorrow someone comes around, somebody's actually doing this, getting drones to survey archaeological sites and building 3D models of them and trying to recreate what they looked like before. If you're looking at restoring old paintings and trying to use artificial intelligence techniques to figure out what they might have looked like in the past, any kind of reconstructive activity in that area is massively aided by CS, right? I just took archaeology because it starts with A. I could start with zoology and I could give you an equivalent example. Like I said, computer science is really, I like to call it a sister to mathematics. Mathematics is the study of the imperative. You know, I give you X and you give me the square root of X. And now that you know that, you know, Y is the square root of X, you can sort of start reasoning about it. You can say Y squared equals X, X is probably positive, yada, 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 unless Y is an imaginary number. And you can start reasoning about it. Computer science is the study of processes. Given X, how do you get to Y? What is the process? How difficult is it? What are the techniques you can use? And just like mathematics can be applied to any problem in the world, pretty much, so can computer science.
Right. And moving on to the ASP, which is the Ashoka Scholars Program, and if I can link this to research opportunities at Ashoka, how important, firstly, is research in computer science and you learning how to do research or working under a professor? And secondly, what does Ashoka have to offer you in this sense?
So there's like 2-3 questions in there. So first of all, I think the fourth year is really important. I mean, the 3-year degree we have is a sort of colonial vestige of British times. And I think if you're going to explore quite a bit, if you're going to take courses in areas that are quote unquote not in your silo, you need that extra 1 year to really get up to scratch, right? And in that 1 year, what we can give you is a lot of opportunities to do cutting edge research. So you can do it earlier on as well. I have first years working on research and they've submitted papers and some have published, right? But what usually happens is you need a little bit of foundation before you can really do really cool research. And your final year, your fourth year, is really when you can sort of spread your wings and do that sort of thing, right? So in that sense, the ASP is really important. In terms of the research opportunities and why that's important, let me put it this way. There's a really great, there's actually 3 TED Talks by this guy, but there's a particular TED Talk by a professor, by a chap called Ken Robinson. I think it's one of the most watched TED Talks in the world. And he talks about what's wrong with education, basically. And he says that one of the biggest things that's wrong is that we're training people throughout their lives to do the right thing when it comes, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. And you always do the right answer and you get kudos if you write the right answer. And if it's the wrong answer, you're a stupid person, you're bad. You've done the wrong thing and you should be ashamed of yourself. Well, what that guarantees is one thing and one thing only, a complete lack of originality. Why? Because by definition, if you choose to do something new, you don't know whether it's going to work out or not, right? Because nobody's done it before. So the ability to withstand failure mentally is a necessary, it's a requirement in order to do anything original, because it's new and nobody's done it, and so you might fail. And if you're constantly sort of brought up in a way in an educational system that tells you failing is bad, failing is bad, failing is bad, failing is bad, and you eventually become afraid to fail, you become afraid to try new things because you'll fail at them, right? And doing research projects is a great way to sort of unencumber oneself, because that's the really cool thing about research. I'll tell you myself, if I'm doing like 10 pieces of research, 8 of them are going to end up in failure, right? But the other 2 times, I'm going to create something and I'm going to build something that no human has ever done before in the history of mankind. And that's something that's very valuable to me. But I couldn't do that if I did not have the mental ability to withstand those repeated failures. And that's something that students have unfortunately been just educated out of, right? Because you had the famous Picasso quote and so on and so forth, children are born artists, etc. Because initially humans aren't afraid to fail. We do things, we fall down, we try and build them again and again and again. But through our education system, we're sort of educated away from the ability to fail. And I think doing lots of research projects is a really good way to get back into that sort of line of originality.
So if I can just build on this, you mentioned that computer science teaches you how to not be stopped or be afraid of failure. How does computer science and the skills you learn from computer science actually help you in life at large?
Oh, you earn lots of money. No, I mean, there is that. It is very much one of the most monetizable fields out there, right? But you remember what I told you about sort of liberal arts and how the Greeks thought that there were these 7 fields, astronomy, music, grammar, rhetoric, and so on, that were important to living as a free person, right? We live today in an information age, right? And so much of our lives are mediated by networks and computers, and so many of the jobs that we'll be doing are going to be somehow computational. That it's actually going to be critical for people to understand what's going on in there. Because if you don't, you're just not going to be as capable. That's just the hard truth, right? It's just like, hundreds of years ago, you could know absolutely nothing about basic mathematics and still function a little bit in society, right? You could just be a persuasive person. Right now, that has become a lot harder. You at least need to file your taxes. You know what I mean? And if you can't, then, well, you need to pay someone else to do it, in which case it's a direct loss to you, right? And I think computer science is going to take a bigger and bigger portion of our lives, and the people who don't at least have a passing familiarity with the subject are going to become more and more disadvantaged.
And so we've got this question repetitively. How important is mathematics to computer science? And specifically to Ashoka, is it a prerequisite?
So yeah, it's important, right? And I know a lot of people hate math. I hate the way it's taught in high schools because they just teach you all the wrong stuff. I was having an argument with a student the other day about matrices, and I'd asked them, do you understand matrices? And he was like, yes, of course I do. I'm like, okay, what are they? Well, they're collections of numbers. Okay, why do you take the row and when you're multiplying matrices, why do you take a row and then multiply it by a column? Like, why? Is that just convention? Or does it mean something? Why don't you take a column and by a row? Is this just a convention thing? What does a matrix actually mean? What is a vector? And it turns out that in Indian high schools, you just don't learn the geometric interpretation thereof. You don't understand how these things are actually like functions that stretch and squeeze the underlying spaces. And unless you do, all of this stuff is going to seem like wizardry, right? And we'll teach you a lot of it. But yes, it is a prerequisite in the sense that if you're going to major in computer science, we do expect you to have done mathematics in 11 and 12. I'm sure the Outrage staff can give you more details about that later on. But if you just want to take a couple of courses and get a passing familiarity with it, I teach this Foundations of Computers Programming course that I teach, for example, has no prerequisites whatsoever. And within that course itself, just to give you an idea, I mean, I gave you the impression that it was an introductory course, but somehow people think introductory also means simple. It's not. By the end of that course, let's say the last time I taught it, my students were sort of doing audio and image processing, like detecting edges on images using mathematical convolutions, sort of multiplying matrices. That's all image processing really is. They were designing mathematical functions for basically population simulations and stuff like that. We had a lot of visual stuff. They were building computational sculptures. So we were doing stuff that people would consider pretty advanced at the end of it. So it doesn't mean that if you don't have math in 11 and 12, you can't learn CS. You can't really major formally in it, but you can still do a lot of CS. And you can certainly learn enough to help you jumpstart your ability in some other field.
And so what are we looking at after Ashoka? So even if you do a computer science from Ashoka, what after that? Does Ashoka give us internships, or what are the jobs that we're looking at as soon as we graduate from Ashoka?
I mean, all sorts. Like I said, computer science isn't a sort of restrictive subject. A large number of my students end up going for higher studies of various sorts. They got into some really cool places, but okay, I'm not going to name drop. But lots of people get into lots of cool places. When it comes to jobs, they're too varied to really sort of, for me to put them in a box. But I think the main thing I want to say is these are not sort of toy side positions. When we're talking about people working in jobs, they're doing sort of real core level work at the centers of those companies, right? They're not doing edge level work, which is just, oh, this person got a recommendation from an uncle and got in somehow, or something of that sort. It's a heavily varied field, but they're doing sort of core important jobs.
Right, and so a degree from Ashoka is surely great, but would you tell students to do something on the side while they're actually working on their degree as well? Is there some skill they should gain?
I don't tell them to do that. It turns out that most undergrads will end up doing internships at various places. It's something Ashoka will help you with the logistics of, but generally speaking, a fairly large number of them end up working at top-notch companies for internships. That's pretty common. And it's a pretty smooth process, actually.
Right, and you actually mentioned a lot of examples from artificial intelligence, and we're getting a lot of questions on this. So what exactly is AI for social good?
Ooh, implies that there is AI for social bad, but no. So artificial intelligence is something that is it's a fairly pervasive buzzword right now. And the thing is, it's a buzzword for a reason. It lets us do a lot of really cool stuff. And AI for social good is really trying to figure out, okay, we have this really powerful tool. What are the things we can do with this tool to make a large positive net impact on the lives of the humans around us, right? So you could, for example, focus on AI to better detect oil fields, you know, the sonar results that you get back when you're detecting oil fields. I mean, that's a legitimate thing and it's important. But you could also use it to, I mean, this is something that's happening right now, to help reduce maternal, to help reduce infant mortality, because that's a huge problem in India. And what you do is basically, lots of people have cell phones now, you take a photo of the child, and this AI algorithm basically takes this thing, takes a look at it, and immediately says, hey, this child is probably underweight. We need to send them help, right? So you get lots of pictures of infants, and you can sort of triage those and decide where to send help, right? And that's an example of AI for social good, right? How do you take this new technology and use it in areas where even a tiny push can make a large impact to the lives of everyday people?
So we've also gotten a lot of questions on, while choosing computer science, should money be an important aspect, or should it purely be on the basis of your interest? And how important is the balance between the both?
I mean, okay, that's a question that only that person can answer, right? I can give you my answer to that. I think money is important, and I think my passion is important. But one is very much a slave to the other, in the sense that money, I think, is a great slave, but a bad master, right? I've just seen so many people who earn so much money, but they hardly meet their own children or their parents. They're always away. They're doing stuff, and then what's the use of earning all that money? It's kind of sad, right? And it's important for each individual to decide what that trade-off should be for themselves, right? Because I think it's kind of useless to say, oh, just follow your passions. Following your passions is important. Earning money is also important. And it is my hope that through a force multiplier such as computer science, you can find a way to monetize whatever passions that you may have.
Right. And have any Ashoka students moved on to establish their own startups? And even if not, are there any provisions in Ashoka to help students start their own business?
So the answer is yes, without the if not, yes to both. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial stuff going on at Ashoka. There's actually a degree that you can get, CS plus entrepreneurship. A lot of people do that sort of thing. And there's multiple people building their startups who are Ashoka alumni. So that's actually pretty common.
Right. And what are the steps or what are requisites for you to participate in research at Ashoka? How do you go about it?
You find a professor, you walk up to them and say, hey, I want to do research. Can you tell me what projects you're working on? And they tell you stuff, and then you say, okay, I am interested in this project, and I'm willing to work hard. That's usually pretty much it. Sometimes they might say, hey, you know, you're a first year who's studying biology, and you want to do research in media studies. Maybe you should take like these 2 media studies courses first, that sort of thing. So they might tell you to take a couple of courses first, but otherwise that's usually pretty much it.
Before I move on to the last question, since we're getting a lot of questions on AI, what would you say about ethics in AI and teaching human concepts like good or bad to a machine? Till what extent can that happen?
So that's really a question people should be asking our head of department, Professor Ravi Kothari. But it is a really, really important question to think about. Because as more and more segments of our daily lives are being taken over by these systems, right? It's just a matter of time before it happens to an even greater level. Having these controls on these systems to have these sort of ethical controls becomes tremendously important. And that's actually exactly the kind of research that we have going on at Ashoka in AI. One of those gets into these ethical systems and tries to understand how do you teach a computer to be ethical. And there's also the other side of it. I'm betting you have a bunch of questions about, can you teach a computer to be creative as well, right? Can a computer create art? Actually, two of the students in my new geography class did a project on precisely that this summer. So these are very interesting questions. You should come to Ashoka, and then maybe you'll come up with a great answer to the question, better than the one that I could give you.
And if you could also spend a minute, I'm sorry for the delay, but a few things on your field of research. Would you like to share something about that?
Sure. So like I said, I do secure computation. The name's super duper misleading. Let me actually clarify what I mean by that. So secure computation is actually all about this sort of thing. So we're really good at encrypting things with passwords, right? We've been able to do that for a long time. So you take a thing that's important to you, let's say your bank login, your bank details or something like that, or your medical records, and you put a password on it and you lock it away. And now it's safe, okay? But now you can't use it because it's encrypted, it's locked away. In order to use it, you need to open it up, and now you need to give it to someone else. But the moment you open it, now it's unsafe, right? Seems pretty obvious. Now, it turns out that modern cryptography allows you to circumvent that. You can actually keep your data private and encrypted, but nevertheless compute upon it. So you can keep your medical data locked up and still give it to a medical researcher or a doctor, and they can still learn something from it without unlocking the rest of it. And my favorite example along these lines is, let's say you want to get from point A to point B on a map, and Google Maps has all the data on all of the map data, right? Now this seems pretty obvious. I tell Google, hey, here's points A and B, give me the road, give me give me the directions I should take. And Google takes A and B, and Google sends me back the path from A to B. Now, if I ask you, could you do that if I want to keep A and B private? I never want to tell A and B to anyone, ever. Well, conventional thought says, no, that's impossible, that's ridiculous. Turns out modern cryptography can achieve precisely that. You can get the path from A to B without telling Google what A and B are. Super counterintuitive. You can look up some of my other talks to see how we go about solving this sort of problem. But it turns out you can do this, and nowadays for many problems, it's actually becoming fast enough to be feasible. Like you can do this on your cell phone. So pretty cool stuff. Come talk to me about it if you're interested.
And lastly, Professor, would you like to mention any books or talks or shows that particularly garnered your interest in computer science?
Ooh, I'll mention just two books. Okay, three. One is Vehicles by Valentino Breitenberg. It's almost certainly out of print, but you can, I'm sure, find a semi-pirated copy. It's actually out of copyright as well, I believe, so it's not really pirated. But you can find a copy somewhere online. It's Vehicles by Valentino Breitenberg. And you can look up some of his experiments about how you can build simple things and humans will believe that they are alive. You can build creatures that like water and darkness, but not light, but not too much darkness, so they'll come out to the light a little bit using very simple principles. So those of you who are interested in robotics can read up on that sort of thing. The second book I'd like to recommend is Gödel, Escher, Bach, right? Just look it up. Just look up GEB, Gödel, Escher, Bach. You'll find the book. Excellent read for people who are sort of at the edges of computer science, but not really in it. And the third book I'd like to recommend is a standard computer science textbook, but nevertheless, it's an absolutely fascinating read. It's Introduction to Algorithms by Corman, Leeson, Rivest, and Stein. Just flip through it, read a random chapter, it will enrich your life.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Gupta, for that wonderful session. I hope our audience enjoyed it as much as I did interacting with you.
Thank you, Sahajpreet. That's it from me for today. Bye-bye.
Our next session in the undergraduate webinar series is scheduled for the same time next week. This session is on academics at Ashoka University, which will be conducted by Professor Jonathan Gill Harris, who is a professor of English and former Dean of Academic Affairs at Ashoka University. The registration link is provided in the chat box. And if you have any further queries or would like to know more about Ashoka's unique interdisciplinary undergraduate program, you can write to us at apply@ashoka.edu.in or visit www.ashoka.edu.in or call us on the number provided on the screen. Thank you and see you next Friday at 5 p.m.